So this is early January 2016, and I thought I'd do a piece on a tradesman of a certain type who I had in the property, and this is perhaps not an uncommon situation. Plumbers are not sparkies. Plumbers are not electricians. They're having to learn increasingly though about complicated systems, which this has been the case for some time because boilers have become super complex, like a lot of machinery now. Things that were mainly mechanical devices like boilers with pumps and stuff, it's turned into, it always had a little bit of electrical content to the work because there's different kinds of pumps and valves and things needed wired together, so there always was some electrical content of a specialised little niche nature. But plumbers more than ever now have to do electrical work, or certainly be aware of it. What this particular plumber was charged with doing was, we'd had the central heating in already. They were charged with replacing the boiler. That was it. I kept it simple because I know that the more complicated or open-ended you make it, the more money you end up spending. I wanted it neat, simple. Boiler was knackered. It'd never been that great. It was a Vokera, or Vokera, whichever you want to call it, which used to have a supplies warehouse or something just down the road from us in West Yorkshire. But really, it was never very good. From the first time, 3 months after I got it, and it dissolved its own little rubber valve thing it had, a membrane. I knew there was going to be trouble with it, and it never got much better than that. However, the particular thing I wanted to talk about was replacing the boiler. So, okay, I'll skip over the bit where the guy says the boiler's not worth anything, the old boiler. And then I say, oh, you can't give me any money back for it? Oh, no, mate, it's not worth it. Right. He obviously had a use for it. Spares or whatever, I have no idea. But his son had trouble getting, his son was left alone to do some of the job while I was here. Cut a long story short on that front, his son was trying to remove it and seemed to have trouble removing it from this rather narrow, cramped space. The new boiler is a bit smaller. I said, well, I thought, this is unusual for tradesmen. Normally they rip things to pieces when they're just cracking on. So I thought, okay, well, excuse me, son. And I grabbed the boiler, stuck my foot against the wall and ripped the boiler out. I think I had to undo a couple of nuts or bolts or something. First, I just ripped it out, and the bits were hanging off it, and I chucked it in a pile on my front porch. I said, there you go, right, crack on, put the new one in. Then he had an extended phone call with his father about this boiler that apparently was worthless that I had ripped out and thrown on the front porch. So it wasn't as worthless, I think, as they were making out. However, let's skip over that. The thing I'm going to talk about is the control system for it, which, remember, was really unchanged because they actually almost always need the same stuff. They need a 4-core cable going to them. Some people try to go away with 2-core or 3. Anyway, you need a 4-core cable. It goes to your little area where I've got our control. The thermostat and the control unit are right beside each other, somewhere in the centre of our house, because that seems to be the most stable place. Whether that's the right place or not, you can argue about all day. But they're right next to each other in a little panel. Now, basically, to set the scene, I had done the wiring on this with the old boiler, and I'd gone through all the troubles that you have to go through to do that, and I got them all wired up properly. So if the temperature changed by 2 and a bit degrees, maybe a little bit more, but basically it would click on or click off as it was appropriate. So it was working really well. The problem with these systems is these little thermostats and the little units, the controller units, 24-hour clock timer and all that stuff, it's all digital, that bit. And the thermostat was a dial-y thing. So it's reasonably advanced. It remembered its time. If the power goes off, it doesn't forget what time it is, stuff like that. So it's okay. The problem with these things is that they have what's called a floating voltage in them if you're not careful. And that floating voltage has to be clamped. So to cut a long story short, you need a 4-core cable so that one of those cores can make sure this floating voltage gets clamped. If that doesn't happen, it keeps varying where it thinks is hot and cold, depending on the temperature and all sorts of stuff. Okay, the voltage and whether the pumps are on it. Okay, so that's why you need a 4-core cable. There's a technical reason for needing a 4-core cable. Right, I've done all that and got it working properly. Guy comes in and I said, he starts messing with this. I said, no, 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 no. I said, you don't want to touch that because that's quite awkward and complicated. And he said to me, well, this is a rat's nest. This, he said, this is, you know, this needs sorting. I said, okay. I said, I will accept that from you if you tidy it up and it still works. I said, but what I don't want you to do is to tell me you've tidied it up and then I find the thermostat doesn't work as well as it did before. I said, so be careful what it is that you're telling me here. And he said, oh, no, I'll do it properly. I said, oh, cool, mate. You've quoted me a price. You're going to do it properly in that price? No problem. I went out. I think my spouse was in. I went out and came back 2 hours later. In the hallway in our house, there's this guy there with all these bits of cable and my little panel's off the wall. It's a little foot square panel. It's off the wall. The wires are all hanging out. Cable's hanging out the wall. Thermostat's got the cover off it. The other unit is there unscrewed. And I'm like, okay, what are you doing? And the guy said, oh, this is a right mess, this you miss it, right? It's a real cowboy's done this. And I said, right. I said, I can accept that. I said, if you do this properly and it works. I said to you not to touch this. I said, okay, but you photographed this, haven't you, before you took it apart, mate? And he looked at me and said, well, it was no good anyway. I said, hang on, it worked. Rat's nest or not, it worked. And if I were to do it, I said, I would photograph it before I took it apart because I'll expect it to go back together properly, at least as good as it was. He said, oh, I'll do it properly. Okay. At least the next 90 minutes was spent with this plumber on the phone to a Sparky friend. I'd asked him if he knew how to do this because I suspected, I found it quite complicated and I'm qualified in electronic engineering. So, no disrespect to anybody, but I don't ask too much of people, and I thought it was a lot to ask of a plumber to know how to rewire this little control unit in this thermostat. It's surprisingly complicated. Okay, fair enough. You tell me you know it, mate. And then, of course, he couldn't. So when I came back a little bit later, he had 90 minutes to talk to his Sparky friend on the phone, quite expensive kind of toing and froing. He'd kind of reassembled it and stuck it back on the wall. And I thought to myself, I'll be very surprised if this... He tried to show me, yeah, it's all fixed, he said, and off he went. So, you know, I paid him his money. It seemed to work, but it did what they always end up doing. After the temperature goes up and down a bit, it goes haywire when it's a different day, or the pump's running, or the refrigerator's on, the voltage changes, and this voltage, floating voltage I talked about, goes wrong. So basically, it went all vague again. So you couldn't be sure that when you set the thermostat to 22 degrees or 25 degrees, that it would actually go off at that point, or go on at that point. And so that's your plumber pretending he's a Sparky. He really genuinely thought that he was going to rewire that and thought it'd be an easy job. Hell no. If you're going to do that sort of job, take photographs or notes of the way it's wired first. Then you know you can put it back together and you will do no harm. You will leave the guy in at least as good a position as he was. So my job after that, of course, is to rewire it all back the way it was. So, you know, I'm not going to thank the plumber for that. So plumbers, please don't do it, because it's not my fault that I wired it and you think it's a rat's nest. It is your fault if you unwire it, break it, and tell me it wasn't very tidy, but then it doesn't work. You know, like most people, tidy's nice, but if it works, that's a lot nicer. Thanks for watching and listening.